So I don't know if you heard, but I rebranded my podcast for the third time.
I did not
It's
know
now,
this.
yeah, it's instead of Think Weird, it's now called Helen's Mindset Strategy Podcast.
Okay.
So
Cool.
the reason why I did that was because I think, I don't know, I was actually influenced by Soapbox Business Show. I have you to thank for, but I think part of it had to do with your branding was very specific and you just kind of said what you wanted to say and you what you're doing, you know?
Thank you. That's a
Yeah.
compliment. I wasn't expecting the influence there, but I will relay that to my business partner there as well.
Yeah. His name is Zach.
Yeah, my friend Zach. Yeah, we co-host
I was
pretty
listening.
much every show together.
Yeah, you guys have a really great chemistry. When I was listening to the episode with Kim, I was listening to the intro and I loved how the music was stacked onto the audio because it just made me keep listening. I was like, oh, this is really, really good. Just the way that it's being edited. There's an excellence to it.
We definitely have that in common in terms of, whatever we do, we want to try to do it with excellence as much as possible. I will concede he is definitely the more technical of the two of us. He's a full-time. He would probably get mad if I explained his title the wrong way, but he's a developer and works on a lot of UI UX design for websites and whatnot. So the website is, although I came up with the content structure for something that we're developing right now, he'll go in and do the full design, and that's all you, buddy.
So you're kind of the ideator, which it makes sense because you have a lot of really great ideas.
From the content perspective, I think from the content perspective, I tend to have more of the, if you listen to the Soapbox Business Show, that was a show originally that I wanted to do. So I'm also big on, if you're pitching something, then, carry your side of the, I don't know what you would call it, but carry your side of the load, I guess. And so if I want to do the show, then carry, the load of what you got to do there. But vice versa. I'm sure we'll have a special episode where he'll lead a conversation of the interview.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you have a way of ideating things, but there's also a level of excellence. Maybe it's because you and Zach have very different aspects. It almost sounds like he kind of executes little details. And in the show, you ask most of the questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you curate guests? How do you find the right guests to have on your show?
The guests so far have been just people who I've come in contact with or that I've found interesting. Generally, I don't try to reach too far above my own weight class of influence at the moment. So I go for people who I think will respond. I'm not going to reach out to Dave Chappelle or something, somebody uber famous, but that's a random one. But I listen to Joe Rogan and he's often on there. So, I'll pretty much, I do, since it's a business show, the criteria is business, although I'm sliding some loopholes in there if I think you work in an interesting industry.
Yeah.
So really for our first episode show, Chris Do was talking about him a lot in one of the future calls. And so I just reached out to him. He responded. And now we've become friends. Kim Illman was actually, he has pretty much just a reach out. It was a gift. He has these things where you can pay for time with him. And I didn't pay for it. It was just a gift because
it's insane.
We're F1 fans and my sister got it for me as a birthday present. And I might as well just turn this into an episode of the business show because I had no idea.
Dude.
I'd rather that than just the conversation. So I asked him, hey, is it okay if I record this and post it? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. So
that's incredible.
Like that. And then who else have we gotten? We got one of the biggest. Yeah, we got Show. And then we got George, who's Mr. Eats 305. And he's one of the biggest food influencers in Miami. And I just DM'd him and just asked him to be on the show. And he was down. I think everybody's down to get on an interview like this. And then especially if you're promising them micro content after as well, that you're going to post it. That's one of the things I put in there. Okay, we're going to interview you and you're going to get a lot of marketing material from this and I'll share it with you if you want to reuse it. So therefore you can kind of promote and market them. And they can, in turn, if they want to share it on their profiles, market your show too.
Mm. Yeah, we're in two very different stages of business because I'm literally just starting. I feel a white belt and you feel a black belt
I
in
don't know
this
about black belt.
conversation. I knew you were going to say that. A part of, because there's also a level of humility in business too, you know, where you just learn to eat shit and you learn
Yeah.
to swallow your ego. And
100%.
my question to you, as someone who is so eager to get better at it, is I've noticed about myself, and this is very much so a selfish question, that I overthink a lot, always in my head. And even in looking at your podcast, I was, man, Mario and Zach have curated these beautiful guests who I genuinely want to listen to. And so how do you get over the fear or the resistance of execution? Have you been through that before?
Oh, for sure. I think self-doubt is something everybody deals with. And if they're saying they don't, then that's just shit. But you have to keep pushing through and kind of reminding yourself that, you know, what's the worst thing that can happen? You know, well, how bad can it possibly go that you doing that interview is going to derail your entire life? Not, and you have to just do the damn thing at a certain point. If you want to create and you want to have a podcast, you have to overcome that hurdle, because the opposite is a much worse choice. The opposite is listening to your fear that you suck, that you're not, that you can't do it, that you're not worthy of talking to somebody or asking questions to a certain person. And I'm a big believer in getting the reps in as much as you can. And so naturally, your first podcast is not going to be as good as your 100th or your 200th podcast. So
it's a good way to look at it.
Silence it. You're going to still be nervous before you talk to them anyways. I know at least at this point for me, it's maybe a little less, but I'm kind of new to the interview game in terms of getting people. I'm more used to hosting. If I need to just talk for 60% of the show or 70% and drive and have a breakdown of what I'm going to talk about, I'm good at that. But the interview, I'm getting the reps in with the show and becoming a better interviewer. And really, it's about them just trying to actively listen and you got to just silence those voices, even if you believe them, until you don't, pretty much.
Yeah. Because you're a creator and then you became a business person second. Because I remember the last time we talked, you wanted to be a filmmaker and you would watch, and you even talk about doing play-by-plays of scenes and just being an imaginer and doing all of that stuff. But how does creative business even come together? Those, to me, as someone who's starting out, feel juxtapositions of one another. Do they ever get in the way?
I'd say it came together organically. The idea of starting my own production company didn't really occur to me until I was probably a sophomore in college. I was going down the actor's route and going about it a different way. And then somewhere along the lines, I was like, I go to probably a great business school that's in in all of Florida, where I graduated from was one of the elite business schools in the state and in the country. And I was like, if I didn't get into film school, which I did not twice, or I think we talked about this before, but long story short, I didn't know graduating high school, even though I knew I wanted to go into production, I didn't know that you had to apply. It sounds like something silly that most people should know, but just bottom line, our college counselor in our school really very much would try to funnel you to just one direction, but there wasn't trying to figure out what you wanted to do and that sort of thing. So I didn't know that you had to apply beforehand in order to get into a program, so the film program at FSU. And so your chances go down tremendously if you don't apply to a film program coming out of high school. So it went from, I don't even know what the admissions rate is if you're coming in as a freshman, but I do know, or when I was applying as a transfer, they only allowed 5 transfer students. So you're competing globally to be amongst 5 transfer students to go to a program at FSU. And I got to the top 25, but I didn't crack the top 5. I guess my story wasn't sad enough, but
that's a dig at the 5 that got in.
I don't know who got in. It was actually funny because the letter was just on our desk forever. Because they back then they would just call you. It wasn't like as digital. Yeah, it sounds super old, but this was like 2010, 2011, 2012. No, not at all. But it feels old thing. Back then they would call you, and if they didn't get a hold of you, it was just like, hey, good luck finding out what your results were.
Yeah.
But either way, roundabout way, I kind of figured out that I wanted to start my own business. And
Mm.
I think there is the juxtaposition in terms of it's different parts of your brain that are working.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
being an entrepreneur, being a business owner is a creative art within itself. I would say the art of
Yeah.
business is supremely creative in a different,
Yeah.
but just in a different aspect. So bridging the gap and kind of transitioning from, I wouldn't say, I would create things like short films when I was younger, when I was a teenager, and do things like prank calls and record them and post them up and stuff like that to practice improv. But yeah, I don't think that they're at odds with each other. I just think that you do need to make sure that as you are running your business, you also are creating. Because at the end of the day, if most of the people that we look up to, I was talking to something about this earlier with somebody, you have to create. You can't really wait for the opportunities to be given to you. You kind of have to maximize it and create something. So that's the goal now.
How do you do that in your daily life? How do you continue to create even when you don't get any offers?
It's tough. It's tough. At the end of the day, you do need to prioritize your business, and you are creating. If I get a project, I'm creating a video. So the creative side is being worked out. But in terms of, I'm talking more along the lines of right now, building a podcast network. That's not
Yeah.
off the ground completely. We're not at the growth where we want to be at. But if you don't start doing that, I'm not getting paid for that, so to speak. That's not paying the bills and keeping the lights on. But it is something that I want to grow towards as I scale a media company, as I scale a production company. And those are things that if you're not doing it on the hours that you're not working, which is the business side, then it's never going to grow. Because nobody's going to come to me without any sort of proof or success to help grow the podcast network. And I hope it is that nobody has to help. I hope it organically takes off, or I hope that it's in the form of a television show or whatever other venture it is. But that happens off the clock. And when I had to start learning the idea of how can I grow my part-time business that I started in 2017 into a full-time business, that took the hours that I wasn't at work from 8 to 6 or 10 to 8. It took the hours that I got home that I was tired, that I had to hop on my laptop or on a day off working. So
good.
It's tough. It's the reason why most people don't go down this route, at least until later, until they have a little more security. I think that's like a thing that most people start doing something for themselves like after 35.
Most people do things for themselves after 35.
Yeah,
That's
I think
actually
it's like
pretty true, dude.
Um,
That's so true. I was thinking about, I relate to your story so much. I remember you telling me this, that you worked for your church in the media department.
Yeah.
And then you were kind of building this empire for yourself part-time. And that took a lot of hustle and work. And now you have 1992 Creative. You're doing local videos for different businesses in Miami. Like you've worked for Puma and Wilson Tennis, which that took time. And I think one of the things that I'm learning, because I'm only in my first year and I'm switching the business model from individual one-on-one coaching to mental health education in a larger form. And this podcast thing only has 18 episodes. But even hearing you talk about how long that freaking took you to grow that company, I was, this is going to take me like 5 years to grow a sustainable profit. And I'm probably going to have to eat cents to the dollar for a while.
Well, first I want to preface and say, I don't know about empire. That is a very nice word to use. I'd say we're like a town with a couple of utilities and key, maybe like a town square.
We're North Carolina.
Yeah. We're trying, but we're not there yet.
But I see what you're building, because I love your journey because it didn't have this linear path. You wanted to do acting, you ended up doing filmmaking, and then you ended up creating your own production company. And then from there, you're creating a podcast network. You were just giving 100% to what you had at the time it was given to you, and you were making the most of it. I think that it's even shifting my perspective in this moment of, I don't have to know where this is going. I just need to be faithful and persistent about where I am right now. Am I hearing you
100%.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the mentality I try to have with most things. I think we do get ahead of ourselves in thinking where we should be instead of where we are. And
Mm.
all you can do is steward the opportunities that are in front of you right now to the best of your ability. And then pretty much take it as it goes. I mean, I wanted to backtrack to something you had mentioned. Oh, with the acting. For me, I don't really see anything as dead. It's still an interest,
That's so
you know.
good.
It's
That's
still an
good.
interest. So there's lots of art forms that I have an interest in that I'm not necessarily doing, that maybe the outside eye has no idea that I even, because I haven't
Mm.
marketed or branded myself to show that I like that. But for me, it was always, you know, it was always kind of part of the whole thing. Because if you don't, when you're starting off and making a short film, you don't have actors around. So you put yourself in it, you put your friends in it, you put everybody that you know in it.
Yeah.
Then you fall in love with that. You fall in love with directing somehow. You fall in love with all aspects of the collaborative process. And for me, it's just, you kind of learn a little bit more about yourself and what you, and I just, for whatever reason, I feel called to build. I felt built to, oh God, I can't talk. I felt
It's
called to
okay.
build a production company that
That's
that
so
I could
good.
handle every aspect, from pre to production to post production. And that's the same thing with the podcast. It starts with a
Yeah.
entertainment show. Well, actually, it started, believe it or not, we started off, we were called the Midnight Exchange. That was our first name. So we wanted,
Whoa. Why that?
the Midnight Exchange. First and foremost, my friend had the name. I thought it was dope, and we
Okay.
had everything for it. He had branding already done. Zach is who I'm referring to. Uh, and I was like, I love the name. And the vibe we were going for was a lounge, you're having an old fashioned, and you're just having some drinks and talking with friends. That was what we were going for. And
Yeah.
this was a show that had no parameters. We could talk about anything. And as we started to do it, we realized it's very difficult to prep for a show that has no parameters. So we were
Oh,
doing it,
yeah.
and it was like, what the hell do we talk about? Because we can talk about everything. So where do we start and where do we end? And so it became difficult. And also, it turned into one of those things where nobody knows who I am. Nobody knows who he is. There's a million podcasts out there of friends who went to each other and said, hey, our conversations are interesting. I'm
Good
funny. I
point.
can make you laugh. We should make a podcast. That's never going to be found because nobody knows or gives a damn about who you are. So
That's so good.
we pivoted. I had the idea and I had the name for Story Archives. And that was a show that it was a sandbox. We're going to give commentary for television shows and films and anything within the storytelling medium. That's our sandbox. Then from there,
It's a great
and
title too. Story Archives.
thank you. And
Really
it wasn't
great title.
taken. It wasn't taken like on any social media. So I own all the handles. I just don't own the website. I got to buy it
That's
off whoever
awesome.
owns it. But yeah, so then it turned into television commentary. And that is what made us actually grow. So we did a show on Peaky Blinders, and that's a show on Netflix. It's about a gang in
Yeah.
Birmingham, London, early 1900s, right after World War I. And we did every single episode of Peaky Blinders. It took us we started last November actually, and we just finished maybe last month doing it.
Whoa.
And we gained, I think, I haven't checked in a while, but we're probably a little under 200 subscribers on that. And
That's a lot.
I haven't published that anywhere. It's just, that's something that somebody might type in there. That's something, if somebody wants commentary who's a diehard, and you're attracting people who the same things you. We actually have reviews, long reviews of people who listen to the show and wrote us reviews. And that blew my mind when we got a fan email.
Awesome.
So that's our focus, is Story Archives and the Soapbox Business Show. Because what we realized was we got the reps on Midnight Exchange was, hey, it's better when you have a sandbox because you can go deep. You can go as deep as you want on this one subject. But if you have no parameters, no rules, then there's no boundaries. And so you always kind of need something guiding the conversation, or it just becomes aimless. So yeah, that's my recommendation to anybody starting a podcast. And you're doing great because you have a niche of what your sandbox to talk about is.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, my podcast has taken so many different directions and I'm still learning and failing as I go. But I was working at a government agency when I first started it, and I was making episodes outside in the lunchroom during my lunch break. And it was called Brain Crafty. And I would just talk to anyone about the brain. It was the worst, worst idea ever. And because I didn't have a direction, and then it was Think Weird, and no one knows what that means. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. So then I switched it to Helen's Mindset Strategy podcast because I think I want to talk to entrepreneurs about how to think about business and how to think about mental health and merging those together. And I think something you said really stuck out to me. You have to like what you're talking about. You have to like what you're doing. And I think my head was in the clouds because I just wanted to create something, but I didn't know what it was. But I think what outlines your story, Mario, is story. You're just driven by story and what compels someone to create a narrative. Mm-hmm. And even story archives, I've heard you tell that story about Peaky Blinders. And what was it about that show that gave you the persistence to keep going?
I think men in general, we love a good gang story and a good mafia story. And because we all secretly want to be,
so true.
We all want to be underworld gang leaders. That's pretty much the deep subconscious thing there.
Yeah.
I just love that show. We have a criteria with Soapbox. Mm-hmm. Soapbox is the new name for our whole network. So we consider it, Soapbox is an umbrella. And then underneath we have different topics that we go about that will expand over time.
Yeah.
The story archives is the whole entertainment side of it. Anyways, we have a criteria for the shows that we do episodically, and that it has to reach that gauntlet level that we have to love this show. So there are very few shows that I would be willing to do episodic to the degree that we did Peaky Blinders, because it is a huge time commitment. I mean, we were doing 2 episodes a week most of the time, and we would have some gaps there. You know, Zach caught COVID in December last year, and then I caught it. You know, and so you have a couple of weeks that you miss, and then sometimes you get busy with a project. I had the Wilson Tennis project, and so we didn't record for several weeks while that was going on. So you just have to get back on the boat, but it's nice because you always know what the next thing is to talk about. Peaky Blinders, because we just loved it. I will always rewatch that show, and it's small enough that it's not a huge show. There's not a lot of good podcasts out there that are comprehensive episode to episode. So we felt we're trying to be strategic with everything as well. You know, we did the same thing with a show called Lupin, or Lupin as the French would say.
I love that show. The show is so good. It's great.
We did an episodic of that. So we have done every episode of that. And I think if you type in Lupin podcast, we're number 2 right after the actual audiobook. So if that show explodes, we'll be number 1 up there, at least until somebody blows us out of the water. Because that show that has picked up almost no traction. I think we have 15 subscribers, but it hasn't blown up yet. But if it does, we're there and we did it. And so that's part of the strategy. So yeah, Peaky Blinders is part of an episodic thing. You just got to be really good or catch our interest for us to do an episodic. Game of Thrones, eventually I would love to go do an episodic because it's
that's
going
to take you forever.
Or Mad Men.
Mad Men's
the top show. Yeah. It would. That kind of show would take us like a year and a half probably.
Yeah. Lupin, I have to say, it's the only show that someone told me to watch, because my personality is the type that if you tell me to watch something, most likely I will hold a level of cynicism towards it because
you're a hipster.
Yeah, I don't getting into whatever everyone gets into. But there is something about the Lupin show, and for everyone that's listening, Lupin is a French television show about a guy whose father was wrongly accused of stealing something, right?
Yes.
The guy has vengeance over a family for doing that to his dad, and he becomes adopted, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's something about the way that you pick a show that I think it has for you. I'm guessing that it has to have a level of mystery. There has to be violence of some sort and action.
It depends. I mean, right now
Okay.
there's definitely a trend for the gentleman burglar genre here of the outlaw who has his own code of ethics that's better than the people in power. So very much Robin Hood,
Oh,
you know,
that's a good way of putting it. I
because
never
we
thought of
have
it that way.
because Tommy Shelby, who's the main character in Peaky Blinders, is very much he's an anti-hero. I like anti-heroes. I like the gray area, good character. Every single show you've heard me mention, Mad Men has an
Yeah.
anti-hero protagonist. It's never black and white. This guy is so supremely good in every decision he makes. I like humanity in my
Mm.
in my protagonist there. Breaking Bad is another one, you know.
Yeah. What is it about the gray area that draws you in to the show?
We want to be outlaws. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, you see yourself in the character, don't you?
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and
Yeah.
in those characters, definitely, there's just I don't know, it's just a draw to it. There's always, you know, something about it. There's like an edge. There's a mystery. There's being a maverick and doing what you want to do type of thing that those themes show out with. That's why everyone loves The Godfather. You know,
Yeah.
it's
The Godfather, I read the book. The book
and
is even better, actually.
really
Just
I've
the
never read it.
details. Yeah, I
You
used
bring
to.
up a good thing there. I want to make a note about that after you're done.
Okay. So I wanted to comment on the anti-hero. I think that I'm personally drawn to it because I'm tired of the generic storyline of
Hmm.
this is the good guy, this is the bad guy. And I think what's so pivotal about the anti-hero is people who are the hero are allowed to be dark and make mistakes and be human. And I think, yeah, that was my take on it. But what were you going to say?
I want to actually make a comment now about antiheroes. So when
Go
shows
ahead.
started taking off, the show that really propelled TV, at least from what I know of TV history, I may be ignorant to certain things, but there was a couple of shows, and it was Sopranos and it was
Mm,
The Wire, probably on both HBO. And Tony Soprano
yeah.
is a local mafia leader, but the
The
show's
first
really,
episode.
yeah, the first the whole show in itself doesn't really feel like a mob show. It feels this is just a guy who works a 9 to 5. It just happens to be that he's the boss of a local mob. It feels more like a family drama slash comedy.
Yeah.
But that was an antihero. That was somebody who was not the good guy as the main character. The Wire too. You have this. It's a dark show, and it's not pulling any punches, and your characters are susceptible to
Mm,
lapses in judgment. And then, but I think where the golden era of television happened was when I would say Walking Dead and Breaking Bad
mm.
started coming out, Mad Men, that started ushering in the golden era of this is going to be really narrative stuff on television. And these are gray area characters, and you're getting big talent coming in and making these
So
shows.
good.
Like, when Walking Dead came out, that pilot blew my mind. Just that I knew it drew me in because I knew
So good.
Frank Darabont was behind it, and he was behind Shawshank Redemption, and so I was like, I gotta watch this thing. Then the show kind of
One of
started
my
doing a
favorites.
decline. You love that show or
I'm
Shawshank?
not, I love Shawshank.
Mm,
I've watched a couple episodes of Walking Dead because my dad and my sister were really
mm,
into it when I was in high school.
yeah.
But I, yeah, now that you're talking about it, the anti-hero is one of those things that I don't know why, but my brain makes these connections with things that I learned prior. But when I was in high school, I took this really weird class called Theory of Knowledge. And what it was it explored the ethics behind systems and why systems work and why justice worked. And my teacher made us watch this 2-part Harvard professor talking about ethics and why ethics matter. But there's a gray area. And Walking Dead and Breaking Bad always reminds me of that, the speeding bus, the speeding train type of theory, where
Hmm.
let's say that you're about to hit people. Would you rather kill someone and pull the lever in your car, or would you rather kill the person that's on the road?
Hmm.
And it's just
Where
a
there's no good
question of like,
choices.
there is no good choice. And I think it makes us human. I don't
Yeah.
know. What do you think that means for you when you think about shows and what that says about you as a person?
Well, for me, I'll say just generally my interest with because it started with film. right?
Yeah.
But as these shows started coming out, I realized there's something that a television show can do that a film can't. And you can tell these stories, these actual character journeys over a longer period of time. Even a long
Oh,
film is maybe 2.5 hours, 3 hours, and 3 hours is pushing it really for a film.
yeah.
But with a television show, you can go 5 seasons and really tell this epic about this one character that you cannot do in a film. So my love transitioned really from film to TV.
Mm.
And in terms of if I were to do something, I would definitely want it to be a television show, simply for the freedom it gives you. Because before that show, before the golden era, you'd never see a big name talent, Matthew McConaughey or Woody Harrelson, joining in a
Never.
show like True Detective. That was unheard of. And now it's commonplace. Now we kind of take it for granted when we see A-listers just all up in every single television show. So I don't know what it says about us in terms of, what was the question of what you were saying?
What pulls you in was my question, but I think you answered it, because you were, it provides a deeper narrative into who one person is, and the
Yeah.
familiarity of that, I think, is influential.
100%. It takes you really for a ride. You can really have a good time seeing this character from his lows and just seeing the complete transformation over, 3, 4, 5 seasons. And we can talk forever on that, but I don't want to deviate your combo too much.
No, that's all right. I think it blends two very different things. Now that you say that, it just reminds me of something that you said earlier, where business is art. Like you have to understand how people think and why they make the decisions that they do. And I think filmmaking and TV production really highlights the essence of who someone is, because I think that mindset in business is just knowing people and how people think and what draws people closer.
Yeah, that's really good. There's aspects of owning a business and working with people. I would say I've always been jealous of music in one sense, and it's that you can do a little less collaboration. Because the music I've always been drawn to, in terms of, if I were to create, it would be just singer-songwriter with a guitar. And it's great because if you know how to play guitar, you can just write
be
your
an Ed
songs.
Sheeran.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with film, there's so many moving pieces and so many roles that you have to have almost like a degree in amateur psychology, or you're the master at that. But
even HR. Okay, he said this, but he didn't really mean it. He was hungry. Can we please?
I'm talking more from the perspective of, you have to know everybody's personalities and how they respond well, and what works for one person may not work for another person.
In terms of vision execution, or
in
the
terms
way
of
that a film is run?
Everything, execution.
Okay.
In terms of getting the vision across and how you work with that person, how you communicate with different people. It's just everybody's different. Everybody has different life circumstances. They got different things going on. And so as the leader of the production of the business, you have to be mindful of that. If you're not mindful of it, you may have, issues. But if you can kind of discern certain people and how they, react to certain things, helps everything kind of move way more smoothly. And that's your job. I think most of the time when you're working with people, they don't really notice that's part of what you're doing. But, do you watch basketball?
I have watched one basketball game, but explain.
I'm kind of a diehard, and there's a show called Inside the NBA with Charles Barkley. And this is a good analogy. When I heard it, I was like, this is a great analogy.
Go for it. I did watch the MJ show on Netflix.
It's great, right? It was great.
Yeah, so good.
So that's actually a good person to use as an example. But Charles, they were talking about a particular player and whether he was a superstar or not, and what the responsibilities of what a superstar has to do when they're on a team. This is like the closest thing I can think of somebody leading a project or as a business owner. And Charles Barkley was a superstar. Shaquille O'Neal, who's on that show as well, was also a superstar. And he was saying, when you're a star, you have so much on your shoulders that you not only have to be consistent night in and night out, but you have to be almost an amateur psychologist to make sure everybody's gelling on the team, to make sure everybody's working towards that one goal. And those are the things that they don't tell you, that you just need to have that in order to really unify and win the championship. And it's everybody has a role, but that's not something they're going to tell you you have to do, but the great ones have to do that. And I think when it comes to film, and if you're working with a crew of 10 or 15 people, oftentimes there's leaders in different departments, but you do need to be mindful of everybody and know how to work with each person. And everybody's different. Everybody's personality type, communication style is different. One person might be dry, might be kind of short in communication, but it doesn't mean that they're doing anything out of the ordinary or going rogue. It just may mean that that's their communication style. And somebody else may be over communicating in different ways or going through something or stressed out because of another situation. But it's your job to kind of see those things and steer the ship. So,
whoa, that reminds me. You've heard of Jocko Willink?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, everyone's heard of him.
Yeah, sure.
But I read his book, Extreme Ownership, and the very first few chapters talk about the Navy SEAL trainings and the carrying the boats. And each boat has 8 members. And so what they do is they'll switch the leader from the first place and the last place team. And they found that the results were extremely different because the strategic measure of what made someone great depended on the direction of the leader.
Yeah, no doubt. I have that book as well. I haven't finished it, but I have the audiobook, which I do.
His voice is soothing.
Yeah. His voice is, he's one of those who, when you hear about his day and how he operates, you're like, I'm not doing enough. But
no, I think the same thing every day. His Instagram, he only posts his watch.
Yeah, his watch and kettlebell workout sweat on the floor. That's it. It's just sweat and the time on his watch. It's hilarious.
So good. It's simple. But finish what you're going to say.
It's one of those things you just strive towards, really, is that extreme ownership of the buck stops with you. It's the reason that you get the credit for a project, it's the reason the quarterback, for example, gets the credit for a project and the blame when things go wrong. And that's the thing that you have to understand in business, is that at the end of the day, the client's looking at you. And if things go wrong, they don't care that the DP had a bad day, that they were tired, or that the editor, messed up on something and didn't execute on the creative brief the way they wanted them to. They don't care. All they see is your name on there, and everything is a reflection on you. So it sounds like, but this is just part of the
part
process.
Of the game. Yeah. It's interesting because I feel business for me has almost been this spiritual experience where I kind of see it as when you're first coming into faith or first coming into church, you understand how broken you are. I feel that's how I feel right now about business, where I feel like I'm learning so much about my pitfalls as a person. That makes what makes me good as a therapist makes me not good as a business person. Because in therapy, you have to be good at analytical thinking. And for me, that turns into overthinking when it comes to business or when it comes to creativity, really thinking about the color palette and what's going to be great in the presentation of it doesn't help in business. You have to go, you have to do it, and you have to obsess on product, but not too much on product that you lose sight of one thing. And so I think, Mario, you've been doing this for what, 5 years now? Just being your own entrepreneur?
Started part-time in 2017, and then...
Yeah, so 5-6 years.
Yeah, full-time I started in 2019. This is 20, 21, 22, 23. It's going to be 4 years in February.
Congratulations. So, that's a college degree or a PhD, what have you.
I think it would have been better without the degree, but
if you could go back, what would you do differently? Or what would you tell yourself? I guess I'm asking from the perspective of undercover billionaire, knowing what you know now, how would you execute?
I've got an empire and I've got billions, apparently.
I see you that way. I do, because it takes so much courage to start a podcast networking company, do story archives, run 1992 Creative. I think you are very humble because you're living your life, but from an outsider's perspective, you're living your dream and you're not letting fear get in the way. And so that's why I'm asking that question. But
thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think you're right. When you're in the middle of it, you don't have the perspective. and I'll kind of come back roundabout way of thinking what just popped in my head. But
Yeah.
I don't know if I tell myself anything different, because if I were to tell a 15-year-old version of me the stuff I know today, I don't know if I would listen. It's one of those things, because you haven't gotten the experience to know what the lesson is that you need to learn. This is my journey. This is what God wanted me to go through to get to where I am today. I graduated with a business degree. The economy was terrible when I graduated from college. It was 2014 and it was awful. I was 11 months without a job, trying to find a job. In the middle of that, I made a short film and kind of made the most of the time. I made a short film about a job interview that I had earlier in the day. So I went to a job interview to be a screenwriter for this local company here. And I promised them more than I had, and I had to rush home and write a script that I didn't have. And so I wrote it within a couple of hours. And it's amazing what you can do when you're up against the
wall.
Yeah, just say yes and then figure it out. And so I did that. I didn't get hired by them, but then I made a short film. But long story short, I was out of work for 11 months. Then went to go work at my church because they had essentially an opening in a position, which, funny enough, the work I started doing after college was AV work for a small company up in Fort Lauderdale, which did live production for another church up in West Palm. And so I was acting in a play for my church, and the pastor's wife came up to me and she was, "What do you do? Why do you keep missing rehearsals on Thursdays?" And I was, "I work, I have to work.
I have to pay the bills.
This is volunteer here, what I'm doing, acting here." So, "What do you do?" I work AV for this company, blah, blah, blah. And she said, "Well, we have an opening here. Do you want to apply?" And so I applied. I didn't have to apply. I pretty much had the job the moment she wanted me to have the job. They did. You got to go through the process, but that's where the full-time job came from. Funny enough, when, you've heard Chris say this before.
Yeah.
The feast or famine mentality.
Yep.
I don't know if this applies to what I'm about to say, but for 11 months, the phone doesn't ring. No opportunity is a yes. And then I promise you, the week after I got hired, I got a call from an ad agency that wanted me to work in production. I got a call from the Miami Dolphins that wanted me to come work on their production team. I got a call from all these people. But at that point, I was, nope.
Oh my gosh.
I said no to them. I'm thinking to myself, should I leave this job? I just started a week ago. But I was like, no, God wants me here for a reason. I don't know what it is. Maybe in hindsight, I should have taken those jobs, but I really don't believe in hindsight too much. So
that's so good.
So I stayed loyal to the opportunity that actually opened the door to me immediately. And I stayed there for 3.5 years, ended up getting a couple of great video projects. I actually had a guy who I brought in part-time who was a volunteer, and then I petitioned for him to become full-time. He says one day, "Have you heard of this guy on YouTube, Chris Do?" Because he loved graphic design. And so the guy, young kid, and now he's in his mid-20s, but he told me, "Have you heard of Chris Do?" And I'm like, "Nah, you do." When somebody gives you a recommendation, you kind of just throw it to the back. What is this? So my algorithm, I guess, because all of our technology listens to us secretly, just started showing this bald Asian guy with a hat. And I was like, who is this guy? And his titles were always things that at that point I was realizing, as I had just done the video projects, it's very difficult to just start out the gate as a video company. And so I was like, how do I turn this into? The idea started clicking in my head after I listened to Chris a few more times. It started kind of formulating, okay, what can this be? And what that turned into was a creative agency. And I started watching more of his videos. And I didn't join the program until after I was full-time, I don't think, at least if I'm recalling correctly. But it helped formulate it. And what I did was I noticed the client that I had that was giving me the video project. I realized there was a massive hole in their marketing department. And they really didn't have a marketing department. And this was a big company. And I was, "You like the work I've done so far? Do you trust me to do it with this?" And they just happened to be interested in that sort of thing. So I pitched them on being their marketing director, kind of being in charge of that. And I got it. In 2019, it turned from the video projects to full-time, not full-time, but as a full-time on retainer doing the marketing work for them. And that's how it started. from there, it transitioned into, by the end of the first year, I had enough video work to be full-time with video. And that's how I know that my passion and my strength is in storytelling, narrative storytelling through video. And that's what I would to focus on. And it took a few years to get the portfolio up to a place that we can, respectfully call ourselves that. But that's how it all formulated. And I needed to do that 3.5 years at my first job. Really.
So good.
I needed that. And eventually what happened was the AV department turned into taking over the social media department, turned into taking over the video department. And I was just taking on more hats for very minimal pay raises, because in ministry, you don't go to work in ministry. You don't do it to make you don't go to ministry to make a fortune. Pretty much. That's right. What they say. And
that's right. Did I tell you I used to work at a church too?
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I don't think you told me that.
I don't think I've ever told you this story, but I want to say something about your story before I talk about me. But you said something that really stuck out to me. You said you were faithful to the job that you said yes to. And I think that I can only really speak about myself. I don't want to make generalizations about people here, but there's something about me that I'm seeing in your story where a part of me is, oh, maybe this is why I'm in the season that I'm in now, because I have gotten offers and opportunities that I've turned down. And a part of me wonders, what could have my life been if I took that? Mm-hmm. But in seeing your life unfold, and I've heard one of my mentors, Sunny, say this too, it's you have to put 100% in the opportunity you have before you and to just be faithful to that. And then opportunities will come as a result. But you wouldn't have started your video production company if you didn't work in ministry for 3 years and have your friend who you petitioned to hire tell you about Chris Do, and then to find out about Chris Do and then start. It's just cool how that all of that maps out.
There's too much that has occurred in my life and in my work. I'm not smart enough to have aligned all of the dots that gave me the opportunity for certain things. Would I have always done production? Absolutely, regardless of whether I was in ministry. But my path of what actually happened was my path to where I got to, because I knew from the age of 14 that I wanted to get into production. So even if something goes wrong, it's not a closed door. It's just temporary until, you get there. But the goal doesn't really change. But I wanted to say something about the transition. You asked me something right before that kind of triggered something for me. You worked in ministry. This is terrible for podcasts when you do this little side banter.
Sorry, I'll cut it out.
Your thought. You go on. I'll figure out what I was going to say.
I'll tell you about...
Now I remember. I remember now.
Go ahead.
There you go. So when I was doing the job interviews to leave my full-time job at the church at the time, I was in the middle of there was like this big trip to Israel that was going to happen. So I didn't know, this was the first one they were ever going to do. And I'm in the middle of the job interview on my lunch break, because I just did it during my lunch break. And my pastor calls me on the phone, and he would, during business hours, most of the time he doesn't call. So he calls, he's like, "Hey, where are you at?" And I see him walking across the field. So I had to pretty much finish the interview and go talk to them. And as I'm in the middle of this process, he goes and says, "Hey," I start to talk to him about this projector that I had just repaired in the main auditorium. And I'm thinking that's what this is about. How we have it up and running? And he goes, "Yeah, that's great. That's great. Hey, do you have a passport?" I was like, "I think, but maybe it's not up to date." And he's, "Well, you want to go to Israel?" And so he offered me a trip for free to go, a 2-week trip to go for free over there. But I'm in the middle of a job interview that I know I'm pretty much going to get. At least have the inkling that it's going to happen.
What's the job interview for?
That was I was pitching the outsourced marketing department.
Oh, shoot. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
So I feel bad. The fact that I'm about to take this job, and I tell him, "Hey, I don't know if I can say yes to this trip. This is I'll tell you more about it." He's like, "What are you talking about? You got to say yes. It's a free trip to Israel. That costs $5,000. It's ridiculous."
Yeah.
And so I tell him, "Trust me, I'll talk to you about it." And sure enough, I get the job. I tell him, and he's sad about it, but but encouraging to go out. And he says, the trip is still yours. And he still gave it to me despite leaving a job. And it was like and it was the perfect punctuation of a 3.5 year chapter there working there. It was it was almost like, hey, you've done well here. Here's a a present. Come see the Holy Land. Come see where I was and that sort of thing. And that's how I rolled into my business. I put my 2 weeks in. As I was done, went to Israel, came back, and it was off and running and doing the business starting in 2019. But yeah, that was the start.
So good.
The caveat was that I would film over there for them. And,
I figured. I figured. Because you're pretty talented. I've seen some of the things that you've done before, especially with Wilson Tennis and Puma. It was pretty good.
Thank you.
But we talked about leadership before. I think you had a really great example of leadership from your pastor, because the outpour of generosity, a lot of bosses who are in ministry aren't always.
No.
And even in general workplace, like they keep you because you are so valuable. But for someone to encourage you and to give you a $5,000 ticket to travel the country.
I'm estimating. I have no idea, but I'm assuming it has to be around there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Going to Israel, going overseas is, even in December, a one-way ticket. I remember getting a last-minute ticket when I was 19. My dad forgot to buy me a ticket to go back to the Philippines. He had to pay $14.50 for a one-way ticket.
Wow.
And so I'm assuming that two-way is a $3,000 ticket. Yeah. So, yeah. And that was in 2017 when I was in college. So
probably even more expensive in 2019. For sure.
Yeah. Even now in 2023, prices have skyrocketed. Mm-hmm. That's another question that I wanted to ask you. It's, as someone who is in the creative business, there's so much negative news about the recession and watch out, you might not have a job. How do you battle against those narratives? How do you fight through even with that going on? Because
they don't help you to dwell on them.
It doesn't. It just scares the bits out of you.
You have one option. It's either, do it or don't do it. But I have found that I think recessions tend to help contractors.
Really?
I may be speaking out of my ass right now, but I just think that, think about
it makes sense. Because they don't want to hire full time.
If you're hiring full time, you're paying benefits, you're paying insurance, you're paying all of this. You may have to pay a contractor a little more, but a contractor is not going to cost you. The benefits is what really kills you as an employer of what you have to pay for employees. So you come in with a bit of a competitive advantage if you're offering a service that they need, that they were doing in-house. So the first thing that got furloughed when COVID hit was creative departments and marketing departments. They were getting furloughed left and right. And then what those people who were furloughed realized was, hey, I'm actually having more success as a contractor right now because everybody's furloughed and now these companies are hiring contractors. At least that was my perception of everything I saw. I was seeing people fired or furloughed from companies they had worked for over 5-10 years and just immediately getting good clients right from starting a business. And I was, it has to be that the companies that are hiring are very smart. They know that great talent is being furloughed and now they can go and get them. And they don't have to pay them benefits. They can just hire them for projects, like a website or an app design or a video project or whatever it may be. So I think heading into a recession, it's good to keep that in mind, but it's debilitating if you keep the news on all day to whether it's going to affect you. My goal, I think everybody's goal should be that it doesn't matter who's in the White House. You don't want to be affected. You want to be in a position that it doesn't matter if they're red or blue, that you're not affected by who's in the office.
That's so good.
Inflation's through the roof right now. I've had people who I work for that have doubled their rates or, raised it up by a quarter. So everybody's being affected, which means that you need to raise your rates because now you're being hit. So you just have to adjust and try to kind of move with the times, but not get wrapped up into that whole ball of negativity that doesn't help anything. Big on optimism.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I notice about you is when people see lack, you see opportunity. that's how you work, and you're pretty adaptable to that. And that kind of goes in line with my church story. So in around the time when I was commuting back and forth in college, my church opened a coffee shop and they were hiring. And I always had this daydream of working at a coffee shop.
Me too. And a
Yeah,
bar.
I always wanted to. Yeah, me too. I always wanted to be a barista and get tipped. And I got rejected from that job. They didn't want to hire me because I didn't have any availability. So I started working at this buffet across the street called Soup Plantation, which is out of business now. But what I would do is I would show up to the church and just wipe tables for free. And on busy Sundays, what I would do is I saw the opportunity of, they only have 3 employees. There's 5,000 people, 10,000 people that attend church every single week. I can meet the need and just work for free. So I worked for free for like a year, just like showing up. And eventually I worked there for like another 4 years, just paying my way through grad school and undergrad. But what that gave me is it gave me sales knowledge. It gave me competitive advantage of just knowing how to sell myself. And it allowed me to not work for the money. And eventually I did want money. I'm going to be honest about that. But I read this in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, where to be persuaded by the dopamine hit of money will keep you from really pursuing your call and having the patience of building a fortune later on. So I see that in you, just your ability to stay the course and to not be bogged down by the current trend of what people are saying.
I have always felt somewhat that I was pushing against the minority in the room, in a sense, not literal minority, but in terms of whether it's an opinion or a thought or a belief.
Yeah.
And when you go into a field, a creative field like ours, you're going to get pushback from people who you talk to. You know, ultimately, we can decipher what the motive is for that. Is it because they didn't pursue their dream? And so, you know, I tend to have a view. I may be positive in some things, but I'm cut and dry in others. And I do find that people are they are always measuring against other people. And so if you're doing something that, just think about it. If you see, the ideal scenario is that you do something great and that your friends cheer you on, your acquaintances cheer you on. But what tends to happen, and I'll admit, there's sometimes where I'll see somebody doing something that's incredible. What it makes you do is you may be happy for them, but it does make you reflect on whether you're doing everything you could be doing or whether you're doing something that you know. And so I think that tends to happen. And I do think, you know, coming from my background, you know, I'm a first generation born in the United States. I'm Cuban American. My family had everything taken from them in Cuba in the 60s and the 50s. In the 60s, they came over here for a portion, not my entire family, but let's say my grandfather, one of my grandfathers on my mom's side, for example, brilliant businessman, best mathematician I've ever known, good at everything he did, but he was conservative in the way that he did it to provide, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, stability, all of that. It's, you know, there's a lot of thoughts about this. When you're catching up in a new country and you're starting from zero, you have to do that.
That's so good.
Because
that's so good.
Without what he did, I would probably have to do what he did. If it was me coming to the country for the first time with a family, with 2 kids, I would have to put that aside and make it work. But when you have people who sacrificed for you, you owe it to them and their legacy and the sacrifices they're made to maximize what you can do. And you just always want to push the ball forward. And that's what it creates. You know, there's a quote about when a country's prosperous, it creates, your first generation is not going to be poets and philosophers. That's not going to be the first job. You know, that you get to that point once you have a prosperous country or family or whatever. But
you got me fired up. That's so good.
But thankfully, you get a little bit of that because you hear people who will say, well, you know, you're going to do that. They think it's a hobby, right? But that's where it's up to you. Nobody can build your dream for you. Nobody can pursue it for you. You can't base it off of people's opinion of how you're pursuing it. And then when you do it and you actually do something good, people will then tend to forget the fact that they're, hey, Oh, you're
They
still
were
doing
judging
that?
you early.
You're still doing that video? You're still directing it and doing that thing? Yeah. And then it turns into, wow, I've seen you doing amazing things. I'm like, yeah, well, it wasn't always amazing. And then you kind of have to shut up and just kind of plug through it and not share it as
Yes,
much until you're doing things, and you just do it.
that's so good. I relate to your story in so many ways. I think Malcolm Gladwell in the Outliers book actually wrote about what you said, where first generation immigrants, a lot of the child prodigies and the billionaires of the world, their parents were bread makers, they were shop owners, and then they became doctors and lawyers. And then eventually the children became huge. But it takes the foundation of that family.
Gary V, I do think
His story, so good.
It's amazing. It's
Late.
His dad has a liquor store, a wine shop, and he feels a duty to his parents who sacrificed and came over. I think they came over as immigrants. I don't know his story by heart.
They did, from Russia.
And so he's sacrificing, and he said he didn't really go after his until he was, I think he said 35.
35.
Yeah,
35.
And so he stewarded that opportunity, helped him to the max. And he said, all right, Pops, I'm going to go do my thing.
So good.
And I think that's an example of that, in terms of that. Jeff Bezos was raised by, his stepdad was Cuban American. He's from Miami down here.
So good. Yeah. My parents growing up, my mom and dad would switch off working 3 jobs at a time. And I felt guilt not getting a master's degree. And it's one of the reasons I did. I know I'm going to go on a tangent, but it has a direction. So when I was in high school, my parents bought me a Canon 60D. And to graduate high school, in my high school, I had to create a community project. And so I actually coded an entire website and put my YouTube videos on there. Ended up getting a couple hundred subscribers. And I would create videos of people's community projects. That was my project. And something happened to me in college where I felt an immense guilt of, if I go this way, it's going to be dishonoring what my parents' dream is for me. And so I'm going to give up this dream and I'm going to set it aside for a little bit and then get back to it later. And I think part of that, if I'm being honest, had to do with fear of not making them proud. I was terrified of doing that. And it wasn't until I became a therapist that I felt the freedom to do what we're doing right now, to even have a podcast. I started a YouTube channel. It's not good, but I'm going to plug it anyway. But it's you're never going to think that I don't know. So many things had to align for us to be even having this conversation. I feel like you just can't predict life. You just have to honor what you have,
100%. I was extremely blessed. My dad's had a business. He's been in the automotive business since
40 years now.
He didn't start it. His dad started it, but my dad took it to the level of where it grew to. And he's been full-time with that, but I've never felt the pressure to follow in his steps, in his business. And he's told me straight up, he said, I don't want you to feel the pressure of doing what I do or having to do, he never was, you have to do this. You have to get into the automotive field. And everything I wanted to do, my parents were always fully supportive. My mom's a little more conservative than my dad, but she came around to it. She was never, Mom, she'll probably listen to this if I tell her the podcast. She came around to it quick, but a mom that wants to protect her kids, she was very smart. She was like, you sure you don't want to do something with computers? Which, by the way, she was right. She was right, because I always tell kids now who are going to pursue a business or do something creative, I'm just go learn a coding language, anything you can learn to code, because the college years you have, if you're not having to work through those years too hard, if you don't have more than a part-time job, that is the last responsibility-free period of your life that you're going to be able to learn something. So if I can give any advice to you, if you're going to go to college, learn something that immediately walking out of college, you can have a job that pays you $70,000 remotely in your pajamas from anywhere in the world. So she was right about that. And I didn't listen, but nonetheless, they were both, super supportive. My sister too. And my dad has always been behind. all of my ideas, everything that I wanted to do. He just said, you just got to give it your all and you can do it for sure. And so they've
That's
always
so
been
good.
amplifying. I've had key people speak good things into my life. I had an English teacher who gave me he spoke some life-changing stuff into my life when I was a senior in high school. Me and one of my best friends, he's two of us. He just said that to me and him. And he said, I've maybe done this 3 other times in my career, something very small number. And he was in his 70s.
Whoa.
And, you remember those things and you cherish those and you remember the belief that people have in you when you have that moment of self-doubt, when you're walking into that huge project that you've never done before, that, hey, these people all believed in me, and you're doing it almost for you. But at the same time, those kinds of things bolster you and carry you through a period when the doubts creep in, when the phones are silent, and I can see why you felt like the guilt, because you have that, you want to do right by your parents or your family and the sacrifices they made for you. That's natural. But the journey is, it is divine, and you can't, my first big video opportunity after I started my business came from a girl who I knew in high school. And I tell her this all the time. I remind her of this. She's like, no, it's you. And I'm like, no, yeah, but you need to be a part of it. She just hit me up randomly because at that point I was posting nothing about film, none of that. But people knew me as the creative guy who likes films. And, I was putting out there what I wanted people to think of me in that way. And so they assumed that I was doing a lot of video stuff, which I was. So thankfully, that's what came across. And she hit me up one day. She said, hey, a friend of mine who works at this place, they're looking for a videographer. And that was my first client. And then that client turned into another, and to another, and to another. And you nurture them, you build them up, you gain their trust, and then they recommend you. But if I had been mean to that girl in high school, if I had, given a bad impression or not done things a certain way when I actually did know her, because I didn't know her that well back when I was in school with her, would she have recommended me? What if I was the D-bag from history class, who, or if I was the kid who always was asleep in history class, those little things that you cannot plan those out. And that's 8 years later, so it's, those
who
things
you are. Yeah. I think what you're saying too is your character and how you approach people matters.
It's a competitive.
It's all about connection.
It's a competitive advantage to actually have character and to communicate, and without trust, you got nothing. And I'm very big on when a client hires me, I want what I would want from somebody if I hired them. My job should not get harder when I hire you. It should become easier. You shouldn't have to, you have the comfort of giving a project to somebody and they can just take it. They checking in with you from time to time saying, hey, we did this. What do you think? Thumbs up, keep going. That's what I want. And that's what I want to give to my clients, is that level of service. I don't want to be a pain in the ass. I don't want to be pulling teeth. You got to be a good collaborator. And, Chris Doe posted a great thing today. I always plug him because he's giving out most of this stuff for free. And your client is not your canvas for your art. It's not the platform for your art. They pay you to do a job. That's your number one responsibility. On your off hours is when you create the thing you want to do. And, if you do it well enough, it'll take off, and maybe that'll be the thing that propels you. But I went on a tangent there. Sorry.
No, I think you made a great point where it's not about doing what you want to do all the time. Like part of business, creative business, is service, and it's serving the client, serving your boss, serving the team, not just what you want. And I've certainly made that mistake before in my pursuit. Yeah. I want to be respectful of your time, because I know right over there it's almost 10 o'clock Eastern.
Oh, it's Friday night, so we're chilling.
Are you sure? Okay.
Oh, good.
But I want to thank you, Mario. This was such a fun conversation. I looked at the time clock. I was, oh man, it's already been past an hour that we've been talking.
You're good.
It was so good. But I want to acknowledge you for a second before I ask you my last question.
Okay.
You carry so much wisdom, but also humor in the wisdom. about all of the things that you've experienced. But underneath all of that is a thread of humility and gratitude for all of the opportunities you've been given.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that your gratitude really drives so much of your excitement about story. And I learned so much about approaching business and like creative business with the right attitude. So I just wanted to thank you.
It's hard to be this great, Helen. I'll tell you, it's hard.
There you go again. My last question is,
I don't know if that'll translate to audio. People are going to be like, what an arrogant prick.
He's not being arrogant. He's just funny, you guys, just so you know. You've taken coaching. You mentioned Chris a couple of times. You've mentioned getting amazing leadership from pastors. If you can impart one piece of wisdom to someone listening who does want to hustle and do film and do something creative or do entrepreneurship or all three, what wisdom would you provide them in terms of the right mindset to go about it?
I don't know. I've got something on here on my wall that I write up here. I write a few motivational things on my whiteboard that I have.
Go for it.
And I have one that just says, focus on progress, not perfection. Learn to fall in love with the process. The journey is the fun part. If you don't enjoy the journey, then you might be doing the wrong thing. The final result is not the thing. There's always going to be something after that. I find a lot of people, including myself, we think that we need this certain level of knowledge or expertise in an area to just go and do. I had a good friend of mine today running his idea for a YouTube channel by me. And I said, he's like, I've been watching videos on how the algorithm works and this, and that. I'm like, look, man, you want to know what I think? I think you're overcomplicating it. I think you just need to get the reps in and do it. You have a good subject, go make the video, see what works, what doesn't. In the process, you'll get better. You'll find out what you like to talk about, what you don't. Maybe you make 20 videos, one of them takes off. You start to pivot your content to focus on that material for a little bit while you grow your audience base. All these things you iterate as you go. You just iterate and move and try to be swift. And you posted about it the other day. You can drown yourself in trying to prepare for something instead of just doing it. And you mentioned you read The Godfather, Mario Puzo's the writer of The Godfather.
Yes.
And when he did the screenplay for The Godfather 1, he had never adapted a screenplay from a novel before. And they asked him to do it. And he said, I don't know how to do this, but I'll give it my best shot. He did it and the movie did great. And he still felt insecure and he still had a lot of self-doubt. And he said, I'm going to buy a book. I'm going to really dive into the screenwriting thing and learn more about it, how to do it properly. And he buys a book on screenwriting. I guess he picked out something that was recommended or something that was, revered at the time. And he opens a screenwriting book expecting to learn a lot. And the first sentence was, rule 1, go read The Godfather. And it was go read his screenplay adaptation that he had done for the first time. Now I heard that on a reel on Instagram and it seems legit. And if somebody can fact check that, then we'll know for sure. But that just goes to show you, you do have to be hyper self-aware of what you're good at and what you're not. And you have to be honest with yourself. You can't be delusional, but there's only so much learning you can do. At the end of the day, if you don't just go and do it, no amount of courses, tutorials, coaching, and mentorship programs is going to get you off the ground. You just have to do it and risk failure because you're never going to be able to jump into it without the risk of it. So that's it.
That's good. That's so good. I can keep talking to you, but I want to respect your time. But
no problem. The club doesn't open until 12 down here, so we're good.
The club. Yeah. I appreciate you, Mario.
I appreciate you too. Thank you for having me on. And so, okay, what's the official name now? It's Helen's
Mindset Strategy Podcast.
Helen's Mindset Strategy Podcast. All right, send me the link so I can subscribe.
I'll send you the link. Yeah, I'll send you the link.